Next we have Mr. John Martineu, who is the expert in geometry, and I think it's not often you can use a word like expert and really mean it, but I think actually when it comes to John Martineu you really can. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you John Martineu.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the jingle. Really great. Is it what's the music from? I recognise it. X-Files. That's right. Yeah. Well, I don't know about being an expert, but and I think what Nancy Cheek said earlier is very appropriate, really. That one carves out one does one's own little bit, but it may well be wrong. And but my own little bit has been surveying, discovering geometry, and then taking it on into other areas, which is what I'll be talking about. I have to apologise for twofold, really. First, for being late this morning, and secondly, because the talk I'm going to give you is not, in fact, called Our Crop Circle's Sacred Art. It's a talk I gave to our local observatory in Wales a week ago, because I've been very busy. I hope you find it interesting. It's still pretty much the same as what I would have said, and it may be more interesting than the one I would have put together. So let's have the first slide. Well, I need my thinger, don't I? Yes. Here it is. Great. The image on the screen is, of course, Glastonbury Tor, and I think from what's gone before today, particularly as was mentioned in the dowsing part, we do seem to be dealing with two forces. In the metaphysics or the model, the dowsing model, again you have two directions being defined, with the upwards and downwards directions being defined. Although crop circles are essentially a flat, plane thing, one always tends to think of them in terms of, or it's good to think of them in terms of a downward axis and a vertical axis. Things somehow, this is why placing the measuring pole in the middle of it seems to be a very basic and essential act. You're defining the axis about which these circles form. And in all traditional arts and cultures, the unification of heaven and earth is at the essence of what one's trying to do when you create a holy space, a church or place of worship. And Glastonbury Tor is a very good example of a type of a place which, by definition, unifies the heavens and earth. And there it sits. The way in which it unifies the heavens, Glastonbury particularly, and the earth, is by the fact that it lies on the line, which a lot of us know about now as the Michael line, which travels from the westernmost point of Great Britain in Cornwall to the easternmost point of Great Britain in East Anglia, and that line is in itself the May Day sunrise. Tomorrow morning, in fact, the sun will rise. In fact, it's not specifically tomorrow morning, it's the 8th, but it's always traditionally held on May Day. The sun will rise everywhere where you stand on that line. The sun is rising at the next point up and down that line. And because May Day itself is exactly halfway between the equinox and midsummer, it actually represents the 8th of the year around. And the fact that that 8th of the year, or the heavenly cycle of the year, the solar year, divided into 8 parts, and these sunrise points are actually embodied on the landscape, is to a certain extent the unification of heaven and earth in action. And Glastonbury is particularly important as well because due east from Glastonbury, in fact due east of the abbey, the old ruined abbey there, points due east, and due east of Glastonbury is Stonehenge, which is the other major axis. The two cross at Glastonbury. It's the reason why the first churches was built at Glastonbury. Carrying eastwards from Glastonbury is Stonehenge, and then roughly speaking Winchester and Canterbury, the line of the great cathedrals. And this talk is largely about the unification of heaven and earth, and crop circles come in as a clue and a series of examples on techniques to do that.
You have to get it at just the right angle to work.
Do you? Right. Try. Now, which button is it? Top one?
Top one, top right.
Top right. Yep, great. Now, this is the old medieval view of the cosmos. And what existed in the medieval period was the idea of a geocentric cosmos. The Earth was at the centre. The planets and the Sun, we all know the Sun goes around the Earth, and the planets were all seen as going round the Sun, but not really around the Sun. They were all on their own little cycles. So that Jupiter moves very slowly, let's say, and Saturn, which was the outermost planet visible to the naked eye, seems to move very slowly through the zodiac, going back every now and then, really, because the Earth's actually going around the Sun, so you get this sort of parallax error. So these things are imagined to be on little cogs out there, but everything is basically imagined to be going around the Earth. This was the state of play for thousands and thousands of years in popular cosmology, and was embodied into the geometry and basic rules of engagement of all religious buildings. And to a certain extent, every time you go to church or an old church, you're actually entering a building which is tuned in to, built to represent that geocentric cosmos. And I'll move on. This, of course, didn't last. The essence of the geocentric cosmos is that we are here. The centre is here. This is what the medieval view was, or the traditional ancient view as well. Although there's not so much written on it or known about it, we can only hypothesize as to what Neolithic people may have thought. But the essence of it is that the centre is here, that somehow Earth is the centre. In that cosmology, Earth is the centre, everything revolves around the Earth. And the corresponding personal idea is that I am the centre, everything revolves around me. Or we are the centre, everything revolves around us. And this image is, I think, very good because it's just a graphic, just take it as a graphic, but I really like it because it not only does the individual who's being shown seem centred, but the centre of the picture itself is the third eye. And yet there is clearly another centre being defined, which is somehow higher. And so although the person, the individual, is centred, there is a shift. The very fact that the individual is centred creates the idea of a higher centre, which is in some way illuminating him. So I'm thinking in terms of a centre, defining a centre, and what a centre might be. Stonehenge is a very good example of a place that's a definite place. You can imagine standing in the centre of Stonehenge. Very few people actually do manage to stand in the centre of Stonehenge nowadays. But if you do stand in the centre of Stonehenge, you kind of can imagine that you are in the middle of things. You've arrived at a centre. It's a man-made centre, or you could argue there was something there before, or it's a naturally occurring centre as well, which man at some point celebrated. But it's very much a centre nevertheless. The guiding geometry of Stonehenge is another matter, and looks very roughly like this. What they've done here, it seems to me, at Stonehenge, is most of this diagram I've got a better slide, but it's got lost. Here's the heel stone at the top there, and thanks, Mike. And basically, it's over the heel stone that the sun rises on Midsummer's Day, which is the longest day. So the sun's basically rising anywhere between there, which is the longest day, and right round here. Midsummer sunrise, it'll rise all the way down here. There's the equinox there, and the equinox sunrise from Stonehenge is 45 degrees, roughly speaking, and there's half a degree in it, around from midsummer sunrise. So you've got the longest day and the exact middle of the year being separated by 45 degrees, which is 1/8 of a circle again, but like the Beltane was an eighth. So at Stonehenge, from that place on Earth, the heavens are creating a geometry, which is possibly one of the reasons why you would choose that particular spot on Earth to build Stonehenge. There are plenty of other reasons as well, and they may be geometrical and they're to do with the motions of the moon. But at this point, it's just a good practice to try and bear in mind an overriding principle. I mean, the dowsing aspect of all this is remarkable too, because it would seem that the Earth herself knows where these places are, and the energies are collected, or it becomes a very complicated subject. What's coming first, the chicken or the egg? But the idea of some pre-existent geometry from a place, the heavens being perfectly divided from a place on Earth, and then that place itself being celebrated, is one to ponder, and underlies many stone circles. And it's largely Professor Tom's work and the continuation of it. At Avebury, we know, is the centre of that Michael-Mary line. So it's the centre point of the Michael-Mary line, and the Michael line specifically, the centre point of it. So it can be thought of as being at the middle of the basic east-west axis of this country, although it's not actually strictly speaking east-west, it's the easternmost to the westernmost point of the country joined. And it's, in fact, the centre of that Mayday line. And I've just got some slides of some other places on the line. This is a little known place in the middle of Dartmoor, so just North Moors, which is just the sorts of places that the line passes through. There's a small cyst here, surrounded by a very small stone circle, and a very beautiful stone road goes off into the trees. It's a lovely place. And Brent Tor on the near I can't remember where it is now. Well, near Brent actually. On the northwest side of Dartmoor, west really, centre point, on the west side. Beautiful place. You can still find clear quartz crystals growing in the rocks there. It's lovely. And the church on the top is dedicated to St Michael. It's very similar to Glastonbury Tor. There's another one called Boroughbridge Monk higher up. And The Sun and the Serpent is the book for all this, and anyone who hasn't read it, I would advise it as a standard reading nowadays. It's a magnificent book. This is another part of the line that isn't actually covered in the book on Dartmoor. It's a stone circle at Score Hill, Gidley. He traces the line up to Gidley, St Mary's Church at Gidley. And then the Mary line actually carries on and goes through this stone circle. Off across Dartmoor to Brent Tor. But it just gives an idea of the aesthetic beauty and the importance of what was going on in those days with the unification of heaven and the heavenly patterns on Earth, and the heavenly division of Earth, if you like, and these beautiful kinds of places that still exist as a legacy to that age. And somehow or other, I think the point one's trying to drive at with respect to crop circles, that when you look at crop circles, there's something very deep, one remembers or recognises something very fundamentally deep in them. And a large part, in my opinion, of what their simple beauty is to behold is this fact that there is some kind of unification occurring between heaven and earth. There's this feeling of heaven and earth coming together somehow in that symbol, somehow in how it's got there. In more ancient times, of course, there was no division between the sciences and the arts, or particularly the craftsmanship, which go with sciences. So here we have a whole load of Muslim Islamic scientists and astronomers fiddling around with all their different bits of equipment, mapping the earth, studying the heavens, trying to find ways of navigating around the earth. And the really important point to drive at in this is that everything that they're using, all the instruments that they're using, are themselves very, very beautiful. Extremely beautiful instruments. They're beautifully fashioned, they're beautifully made, and almost all the scientists who are using them will be actively involved in the making of them. So the scientist is not saying, is at no point removing themselves from that world of beauty at any level, or from using their hands. And there's an important lesson in that for modern scientists, really. Although, to be truthful, a lot of modern scientists who we can criticise, a lot of them, when you actually get to know them, do play a violin or paint or something as well. But this is a sideline, it's regarded as a sideline to their activities. Only 400 years ago, that kind of activity was regarded as essential to your quality as a scientist. In fact, in Pythagorean school, you were not allowed to actually be in the Pythagorean school unless you were a vegetarian, and all the rest of it. The whole thing was monastic and treated as such. and the highest standards were required in their living day-to-day of a scientist. Nowadays one tends to think of the two being opposed. Here's the moon. The moon is the primary, secondary body, if you like, or it's not primary or secondary, one of the two big bodies that we have, the sun and the moon. The essential fact that the two appear to be the same size from Earth, you could regard as the starting point for what you might call the metaphysical approach, or metaphysical question, the primary metaphysical question, or apprehension. Once one realizes that the two bodies, the sun and the moon, are the same size only from Earth, that us being here on Earth means that these two are the same size, and which fact, I suppose, gives the extraordinary coincidence of the solar eclipse. The solar eclipse is so that the two bodies are so exactly the same size. They're in fact, it's 0.5 of a second in it. But anyway, the moon and Earth are both moving in and out, and they've all got their own wobbles, so that you have all the different sorts of eclipses. You can have an eclipse where the moon completely covers the sun, or we can have an eclipse where the moon's a bit further away from Earth, and you get the annular eclipse. So it's a bit further away, so it's a bit smaller, the moon, so you get the ring of fire. But the tuning of those two bodies, if you like, the essential male and the female archetypes from Earth, it is a very important manifestation, if you like, of a metaphysical principle. From a scientific point of view, it's purely coincidence. From a metaphysical point of view, it is a necessity. It has to be that way. It's no coincidence, or the coincidence of it must be taken seriously, or not too seriously though. And the inclusion of these metaphysical truths into architecture and man's built environment and his day-to-day habits and methods of organisation and operation, again, it used to be much more done than it is now. What you move from in the Platonic school is you move from the absolute realm of truth and reality through down into a lower form where you're ruled by opinion, and opinions can have no place. The idea is if you're in a metaphysical realm. Metaphysics is simply the study of that about which there will be no dispute, you could say. Or which is about that. I'm running into sort of deep water here. I can see lots of people looking very annoyed at also. This is John Michel's very, very wonderful diagram of the relative sizes of the Earth and the Moon, and any artists or designers or architects or town planners amongst you would do well to take this on board fully, because it's one of the single most important pieces of research in my mind to be done this century. And apparently there's no, he didn't get it from anywhere. When I say didn't get it from anywhere, he actually did discover it. What it basically shows is the relative sizes of the Earth and the Moon. They're shaded as two sort of balls. The top left-hand little diagram shows a 3 by 3 square of 3. Off each side of it, you build a 3, 4, 5 triangle, Pythagorean triangle, to make a sort of roof shape. That means you have a bottom length of 11. You drop the 11 by 11 square off the roof, and then fill your two squares with the circles of the Earth and the Moon. This very accurately, over 99.9% the accuracy is, proportions the relative mean diameters of the Moon and the Earth in a 3 to 11 ratio. So 3 to 11 is the basic ratio of the size of the Moon to the size of the Earth. In this particular construction, what's very beautiful about it as well is that if you draw a circle centered on the Earth through the center of the Moon, that circle has a perimeter a circumference equal to the perimeter of the square enclosing the Earth. Both have a perimeter of 44. And what this means is that the square and the circle having equal perimeter is what's known as a squared circle. Now, squaring a circle is again the basic act, symbolic act in geometric terms, of unifying heaven and earth. The circle representing heaven, and the square representing our experience on Earth. So if you can create a square and a circle of equal area or perimeter are the two standard methods, you square a circle and the proportions of it are supposed to embody, and the idea is, and carry with it this unification of heaven and earth. And this diagram not only proportions the earth and one of the two main heavenly bodies, but also, so it's unifying heaven and earth in physical terms and symbolically. It's a very beautiful diagram and very easy to remember. It's in all of John John's books. He shows it in almost all of his books. This brings us to crop circles. Now, this little thing is very beautiful. It's just a small grape shot, and if one was to say anything about it, all you could really say is that it's defining a direction and a centre. It is in itself a dot of a kind. It's a circle. It is a centre, and I think it's the experience of walking into a cropped circle, as opposed to a big pictogram, just a circle, is of being in an extended sense of centre. You're in a square field, which is of corn planted in lines, and suddenly you walk into this thing and there's this enormous spiral and it has a centre, and you head for the centre. People always go and stand on the centre. It's just what people do. Most people, you don't really think in terms of points, unless you're a dowser and actually looking for the harmonic points and everything. People, more simple level, people are heading for the centre. This is going to be complicated, right? It's a bit of a hodgepodge of a talk, this one. But this diagram is from my tutor, Keith Critchlow's book called Order in Space, which is a very good book, and it simply shows the three separate ways of arriving from a centre, if you like, a dot, point, through to a three-dimensional form. And I really put it in here just to, so it'll do different things for different people. The idea is that there are three paths to three dimensions. In each case, you start with a dot, and the second step, or labeled here step one, will create the first dimension, which is a line. The next thing that one can do is either to take that line and redraw it to create a triangle, so an equilateral triangle, or drag the line. So in that case, you're moving up another point. In fact, you're repeating your first movement again. In this case here, you're dragging the line. It's a sliding going on. That's the second type of an action. And the third type of an action of what you can do with a line is you can rotate the point, which is to regard one end of it as being fixed and the other end as having movement, and the line as being the thing. This creates the three basic forms of two-dimensional object. So if you like, they're the units, two-dimensional units. Three-dimensional units are created by repeating the kind of act you did in the second step. So in this one here, we moved one dot to there. In this case here, we moved that same dot up again. So we've repeated the action and created a tetrahedron. This was a sliding action, if you remember. So we're going to slide that entire thing vertically. There, bang, up it goes. You have a cube. And this, if you remember, was a rotating action around a point. So the next thing you do is you rotate that whole thing about a line, which means that it's spun, which creates a sphere. Now, the tetrahedron and the cube, which are in the last two diagrams, are two of what are known as the Platonic solids. Plato was, I think, the first really to speak about them. There are five known Platonic solids. There are only five. This is about this. There is no doubt. It's not a matter of opinion. The five are the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the cube, and the icosahedron, which Plato put with fire, air, earth, and water. And there is a fifth one called the dodecahedron. The key thing about Platonic solids is that each face is made up of the same shape. So that both the tetrahedron, the octahedron, and also the icosahedron are made of equilateral triangles. The cube made of squares, and the dodecahedron is made of pentagons. Now there are no other solids that you can make at all without mixing different sorts of things. So here are known as the Archimedean solids, of which there are 13, where you're mixing squares and triangles. These are like building blocks, if you like, for three-dimensional form, particularly these 5 here. They're the basic building blocks. The dodecahedron will return to some of the later slides, and it is particularly interesting because Plato said that he never referred to it by name, he never describes it, and the element ascribed to it was ether. And certainly the way I'm beginning to think about it at the moment, but this may just be me, is that in some ways it wasn't for lack of understanding or for the fact that he was not allowed to speak about it or things like this that he didn't. That I'm beginning to wonder whether, in fact, the best option with this sort of material is to understand that some things are, when the etheric is manifest, it's not necessarily unhealthy, I suppose is the way. Stanley Messenger always says that plants, poisonous plants, are ones which have swollen to actually physically manifest their own etheric bodies. And when plants actually become swollen, this is the hallmark of all poisonous plants. They're often ones that one or other part of them has actually physically become its etheric body. And this is maybe one of the reasons why this kind of, the fifth element was never shown, talked about, or really to be played with too much. I'm not sure about this, but it's certainly what I'm thinking about at the moment. It'll be different next year. Here are the rest of the solids. I'm sorry I'm taking so long with these 2 slides, but there are a couple of people here who are sort of working on all this, and I promised I'd leave them on the screen for some time. This is the Archimedean solids running down here, and stopping there, that's the 13th, and here are 4 stellated solids. There are more stellated solids, so you can really draw a line across there. The numbers 5 and 13 are both numbers found in the Fibonacci sequence, and the Fibonacci sequence, which you do by adding your previous terms together, so you go 1, 2, 3, and you add the 3 and the 2, makes 5, the 5 and the 3 makes 8, the 8 and the 5 makes 13, and so on. So you have 5 Platonic solids, 13 Archimedean solids, and the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence are the numbers that many flowers grow on them, and a lot of living forms do as well. These sorts of shapes and the contemplation and study and apprehension of them is very much synonymous with understanding the basic blueprint of life. And the employment of what you've understood, having studied about them in terms of into the built environment, must be healthy. That's the best way of putting it. Must be, by definition, something hopefully which can be tuned. This is Castle Riggs Stone Circle in the Lake District, and it's a very good example again of, you have to remember this talk was given to astronomers. I'm very sorry. It's a very good example again of how the geometry of a stone circle, this is Professor Tom's work again, has been, most stone circles are flattened, they're not circular, and the flattening of them and the orientation of the flattening has always been a puzzle, and I suppose it's from the astronomical point of view, from the surveyor's point of view, that the thing's been largely understood now, I think, largely. The heights of the stones, no one's really come up with any reason, or the shaping of them. I don't think there's any very good work being done that I've read on that. And the dowsing side of it, I'm afraid I don't know very well. I'm sure some of you do. How the shapes might refer to the dowsed patterns, or maybe what comes first, and things like this. I don't know about it, but certainly at Castle Rigg, what you've got here is the Candlemas sunrise and magnetic north actually form a 120-degree angle. Candlemas is a quarter back from May Day, if you like, it's February